And welcome everyone to part 5 of my Wrestlemania MVP LVP series, where I take a look at all the Wrestlemanias throughout history and determine who was the most valuable player and who was the least valuable player. And today we've got 3 Wrestlemanias lined up, and they are some very special ones, especially for me from a nostalgia perspective. WrestleMania's VIII, which was the first WrestleMania I ever saw live on pay-per-view. Prior to that one, all the WrestleManias I saw were on videotape. This one I actually got to see live, and I have distinct, very vivid memories of watching that show. And WrestleMania VII, which was probably my favorite WrestleMania when I was a kid. I remember watching the videotape of that and then going, I want to watch it again. Like immediately after it was done. I just remember really liking that show, and I have a lot of great and fond memories of watching it. And the third WrestleMania we'll be covering is WrestleMania 26, which is most known for the retirement of Mr. WrestleMania himself, Shawn Michaels. So, very, very fun trio of WrestleManias to cover today. So, with that, let's get started. WrestleMania 8, picking out a most valuable player from this show, was a little tricky because there are 2 matches in particular that stood out on this show. The 2 championship matches. Roddy Piper versus Bret Hart for the Intercontinental title. Randy Savage versus Ric Flair for the WWF title. And those were the 2 matches that were considered the highlights of the show. And you had the main event of Hulk Hogan versus Sid, which wasn't very good. But I do want to give a shout out to the Ultimate Warrior, who practically saved that main event from being a train wreck. The shock of his return was so well done and so exciting that people kind of forgot that the match stunk. So, kudos to the Ultimate Warrior. He actually saved a WrestleMania main event. And it's one of those funny things. People say Warriors suck, but I look at, WrestleMania 6 had an excellent main event with Hogan. WrestleMania 7 had an excellent match with Savage, which I said in my top 30 series was my favorite WrestleMania match of all time. And here he practically saved the main event. So, Ultimate Warrior, he had his moments, and they typically came at WrestleMania. But narrowing down the MVP list to the 4 guys in the 2 title matches, this was Ric Flair's first WrestleMania. It would actually be his only WrestleMania during his run in the WWF. He wouldn't make another appearance at WrestleMania until he would return in 2000. He returned in late 2001, right after the Invasion angle, which that's hilarious. You do a WCW Invasion angle and you don't bring in Ric Flair until after it's over. Like literally the night after it's over, then you bring in Ric Flair. That's hilarious. Came in late 2001, and then at 2002's WrestleMania 18, he worked against The Undertaker. So it would be a good decade before Flair would show his face again on the grand stage of WrestleMania. Put him in the title match, even though they didn't close. It was an excellent match and a great showcase for Flair. And Randy Savage also got to shine like no other. I mean, Randy Savage, I've said it before, he was kind of like the Shawn Michaels of the early WrestleManias. He was the guy that wasn't always in the biggest match, but typically was, if not stealing the show, was having one of the better performances at least. And Randy, this was no exception. This was an excellent match for him as well. And then looking at the IC title match, this was Bret Hart's first major singles WrestleMania match. He had the Battle Royal at 5, which was a kind of testing the waters with him as a singles guy. And but this was his first major, okay, let's see what you got, kid, type of match at a WrestleMania. And he was in there against a huge star in Roddy Piper. So no pressure, none at all. And played the babyface in the match, and I thought did beautifully, especially getting the blade job, which he famously was able to hide and avoid getting fined for because they had a no blade policy back then. Flair and Savage got fined. Bret and Piper did not, because Bret was able to hide it, which is kind of hilarious. Because that was one thing about Flair. It's like I can watch any Ric Flair match where he blades. I can tell you exactly where he's doing it. It's obvious as hell. But and the WrestleMania 8 match is no exception. But Bret Hart, first major title, wasn't his first major title win because he'd beaten Perfect for the IC title the year before, but this was the win that put Bret on like the path to becoming something bigger than just a mid-card guy. I felt like getting a clean win over Piper was like, wow, okay, maybe there's something to this guy, and they've got some long-term investment here, and sure enough, Bret Hart would become a WWE Hall of Famer, but if I had to assign an MVP for this show, I'm going to give it to Roddy Piper, the legendary Hot Rod himself. I think the match with Bret is the best match of his career. I think it's one of his best performances, and remarkably unselfish of Piper to do what he did in this match. Not only putting Bret over clean, but also playing pseudo heel in this match, because I remember watching this as a kid, and my inclination was to root for Piper, because in my 7-year-old brain, Piper was the bigger star, and I was more familiar with him and more comfortable with him, so my inclination was to root for Piper. And then him going heel, like, mid-match, my 7-year-old brain was like, go Bret! Piper's cheating! And he's being mean! And it was very good of Piper to do that, to kind of give Bret the full rub and not hang him out to dry, because it could have easily turned into Piper's the favored one for being the bigger star and the more established name, and Bret's just lucky to be in there with him. But Piper went above and beyond and really made him, really made Bret look like a superstar. And I think, and those are true accomplishments in wrestling. I've said it before, but like title wins, are typically referenced as far as like building one's legacy. But I'm like, at the end of the day, like, nobody really becomes a world champion. They just play one on TV. Nobody really wins a championship belt. It's just the booker's decision to put a belt on them. But somebody going out there and working his ass off to put over this one guy and help make him a star and give him a rub, while also looking like $1 million yourself, without going into business for yourself and all that other fun stuff, that's a huge accomplishment. And I think this match, even though he would lose, I think is one of if not the greatest accomplishment in Roddy Piper's career. And I think Bret Hart's main event run later on can be in some ways attributed to Roddy Piper, because he was just willing to give Bret that rub and really help him out. So I'm gonna give MVP to the Hot Rod here. And rest in peace, Roddy. You were a true legend in this business, and this match is, like I said, if it's not your greatest accomplishment in wrestling, it's very high up there. Now, least valuable player, this was an easy pick for me. I referenced the main event and how it wasn't very good. One of the reasons it wasn't very good is that Papa Shango mistimed his run-in to cause his disqualification. It was going to be a DQ anyway, which isn't the best finish for the main event of a WrestleMania, but it forced Hogan and Sid to kind of cook up this weirdo finish on the fly, where they had to toss Harvey Wippleman around, and Whippleman's interference supposedly caused the DQ, which doesn't really make much sense, because Wippleman never put his hands on Hogan or broke up a pin or anything. But mistimed it, man, and it kind of created kind of a confusing situation, I should say. And fortunately, Ultimate Warrior. Never thought I'd say this. Ultimate Warrior actually made the situation less confusing by doing his run-in and just making people forget about what was going on. So, Papa Shango really was almost like the shit sandwich on top of the shit salad of a really bad WrestleMania main event, which was fortunately saved by Ultimate Warrior. So, but I'm going to give LVP definitely to Papa Shango, who's actually a Hall of Famer himself now, so there you go. All right, next up, for WrestleMania 7, MVP of this show. Well, I mean, this show was the birth of The Undertaker's streak, but he didn't play a big enough role in this show to really warrant getting MVP status. It was the last time the Hart Foundation would tag together on a major pay-per-view, minus the Canadian Stampede 10-man tag years later. It was the first WrestleMania win for Shawn Michaels, and the last time the Rockers would appear at a WrestleMania. Shawn would go strictly singles after this. It was the WrestleMania debut of the Road Warriors, the Legion of Doom. A lot of historical goodies in there, but we're talking MVP. I'm thinking of the guys who really helped kind of steal the show here. You look at Hulk Hogan being the All-American hero to topple Sergeant Slaughter. I thought both of those guys brought a lot of heat to the main event, a lot of controversy as well. It's kind of what this WrestleMania is known for. Whether or not that's a good thing, I'll leave up to you, but I remember it, that's for sure. It's definitely significant and memorable. I give Jake Roberts and Rick Martel a lot of credit for the blindfold match, which I thought I think that match gets a bad rap. A lot of people shit on it. I think it's brilliant and very entertaining. And not many guys could have pulled that off. I think Jake might be the only guy that could have pulled that match off. You've got Ultimate Warrior, who had what I think is the best match of his career against Randy Savage. And you had Miss Elizabeth, whose return after that match created this huge emotional moment that, I still remember to this day. But, I'm giving Ultimate Warrior credit for the match. I'm giving Miss Elizabeth credit for the post-match. Who was involved in both? Oh, yeah, Macho Man Randy Savage. I said that this match was my favorite WrestleMania match ever. I stand by that. I think it's a very dramatic, satisfying, excellent, exciting match, pretty much from start to finish. I truly believe that both guys were fighting for their careers. And Savage worked the match beautifully and gave, a huge once-in-a-lifetime performance on a huge stage. And then had that emotional moment in the sun on his way out. By reuniting with Liz, and people in the audience are crying and all that other stuff. So part of me wishes this had been the end of Randy Savage's career, because you couldn't ask for a better ending than that, This was really well done. Very, very well done, and excellent stuff. And I think Randy Savage deserves a ton of credit for pulling this off and creating one of the most memorable WrestleMania matches and moments ever. So yeah, without a doubt, I referenced it earlier. He was kind of the Shawn Michaels of the first decade of the WrestleManias, and this one was definitely an indicator of that. These two went out there, stole the show, and I think Savage, delivered yet another amazing WrestleMania performance. Now, who's the least valuable player? Some guys were kind of thrown in there for pointless jobber matches, like Dino Bravo and Greg Valentine got fed to Earthquake, and Power and Glory got fed to the Road Warriors. Although I would argue it's they made the Road Warriors look like the Road Warriors, so they did their job at least. Jimmy Snuka, same thing. He did his job, making Undertaker look like a monster. Tito Santana just kind of got thrown in there against the Mountie, but again, they were pushing the Mountie, so he did what he was told and made the Mountie look good, so you can't fault him for that. But if I'm going to assign a least valuable player to this show, it's going to come from that Demolition versus Katao and Tenryu match, which I know there was a cross-promotional thing going on, and later that year they would do the SWS Super Show. But I'm going to give least valuable player to Katao, who was positioned here to kind of become a big star in Tenryu's promotion. Former sumo champion, was going to come in and got a big spot at WrestleMania. Well, not a big spot, but a significant little feather in his cap where he got to be on the winning team on a match at WrestleMania right before, some more cross-promotional work with the WWE. And then the little fuckface threw it all away. He's working Earthquake at that SWS show, and then shoots on him and acts like an asshole and basically gets blacklisted from the business. Wow, fuck that guy. It's Demolition was one of my favorite teams during the 80s for the WWF, and to see them just kind of get thrown out there and get fed to these guys, and Tenryu's a legend, but, American audiences didn't know who they were, and Katao being positioned to get kind of a rub from this, and then ultimately throw it all away. It's wow, fuck that dude. And see, yeah, I'm going to give him least valuable player because he was supposed to benefit from this and he threw it all away. So it's well, what was the point of all this, It's damn. Goddamn. It's like Bruce Pritchard's imitation of Vince McMahon. Well, goddamn. The fuck is that fat kid doing? Shooting on Earthquake. Can't have that. It's not good business. Goddamn. Anyway, that brings me to the final WrestleMania of this episode, WrestleMania 26, which I pretty much already given away the MVP. I could give it to Taker. I could give it to Evan Bourne, who had a crazy spider monkey performance in the Money in the Bank. But it's got to be Shawn Michaels. He had one last great match as his retirement match. He was allowed to close the show. I thought him and Taker had a match that was really, really good. Not as good as their 25 match, but an appropriate send-off from Michaels. And, he got to go off into the sunset and go out on top and had an excellent match. That's really all there is to say about it. Just a nice farewell for Michaels. He's easily the MVP. There's no one else I even considered for this. Now, least valuable player, I thought about giving it to Vicky Guerrero. And pretty much any woman that was involved in that 10 Divas tag, which I know a lot of Divas matches, especially back then, kind of got shit on because they were like just thrown out there and they were always pointless and never did anything. But to me, it's like, in most cases, they were just popcorn matches. They weren't what I would call good, but they were popcorn matches. It was like, fuck it, whatever. This one managed to be truly offensively terrible. Like, go back and watch that match. It is a botch fest almost from the word go. And Vicky Guerrero looked... I mean, she couldn't even pin the girl right. I mean, it was just terrible. It was just terrible. So bad. And then you had that Bret Hart versus Vince McMahon match. We waited 13 years for this, and it was an absolute stinker. I don't know who booked this, who put this together, but to me, it's like, guys, it needed to be 5 minutes tops. You just, let Bret beat the piss out of him, put him in the sharpshooter and go home. Like, this didn't need to be 15 fucking minutes or however long they dragged it out for. I'm going to give least valuable player to Bret Hart. It's his first WrestleMania since leaving the company. So 13 years. And that's what we get? Holy shit. So the Montreal Screwjob and all the waiting and all the anticipation to get Bret Hart back in the WWE. And that's what we get. Wow. Okay. And speaking as someone who's a huge fan of Bret Hart and a huge fan of his work, it was disappointing for me to see Bret Hart reduced to that. Like, oh, he's just a guy that goes in there because he can't bump because he had the stroke. He can't bump. Can't really do anything. That was really all he could do. And it was like, man, that's not what you want to see out of one of your old favorites. You kind of want to remember them as when they were at their best. And Bret Hart was so far past being at his best that it was actually kind of sad to see. So I'm going to give least valuable player to Bret. It hurts me to do it because I love Bret, but I calls him as I sees him, and that was that match was a stinker, and unfortunately I think it put a slight blemish on Bret Hart's legacy, unfortunately. But that is it for this episode, so hopefully you all enjoyed it. Hopefully you all have been enjoying the series. I'll have one more before the month is up, and then I'll have 5 more to do in March. So, yeah, these are... I kind of enjoy doing these. They're kind of quick and easy. I kind of like doing them. But in any case, be sure to like and subscribe. Follow me on Twitter. Hit the little bell icon below so you can get notified of any of my future videos. And stay tuned for more because I will have several more videos lined up for you. But that is all I have for you right now. So until later, y'all have a good one.